Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome. There we go. Welcome officially to Wednesday. Wednesday. So, tomorrow, as you may know, um, we're taking the day off, right? Which I probably don't have to tell you because students tend to know. Students tend to know about holidays even before I do. So, I probably don't have to tell you that. Does anyone know why we're having a day off tomorrow?
Truth and reconciliation.
What on earth does that mean, truth and reconciliation?
No idea.
No idea?
It sounds slave maybe.
It sounds what?
Slave.
Not quite. Not quite. Arad, do you have any idea what tomorrow's about?
Actually, I've heard a couple times, but just like ignore it.
Didn't stick.
Whatever it is, it's wrong.
Edo, what do you think?
About,
Do you know what tomorrow's about?
about indigenous
Ye-
people.
Yeah. So let me give you just a little bit of background. We're not really going to talk about this now because this is a social justice class and we don't need an excuse to talk about Indigenous people. We'll talk about them a little bit later in the course. I have a section where we deal with this. So I'm not going to go too deeply into it right here, even though the day is tomorrow. Um, but in a very small nutshell, Indigenous people were here first, right? So their ancestors came to North and South America 15,000 years ago or so, and until maybe 1500, so for thousands and thousands of years, they were the only people here, right? And there were Indigenous people all the way across Canada and the United States, all kinds of different cultures and languages and traditions and ways of living, until, as you probably know, Columbus, quote unquote, discovered the New World, right? And after that, we saw kind of wave after wave of explorers and colonists, and new countries like Canada and the US were created. And in the process, Indigenous people were pushed aside, right? Because in a way, they had to be kind of removed from the land so that the governments of the US and Canada could build the kind of country they wanted, right? Which was a white European Christian country. And they did that, right? The US and Canada are kind of that, right? And so they succeeded in doing so. But in the process, they basically destroyed the cultures of Indigenous people. Many, many thousands of them died. And the most significant of which, not the most significant, the most recent memory has to do with kids that went to Indian residential schools. We'll get to these in a little bit. In a few more weeks, we'll get to these. But these were schools set up by the government to educate Indigenous kids. They were boarding schools. But unfortunately, they didn't really do that. The schools were kind of designed to, to basically remove Indigenous culture from these kids, right? So we in this class we talked about socialization and enculturation. Well, whatever the reverse of that is basically what these schools were trying to do. And they were brutal. These kids suffered physical and emotional and sexual abuse sometimes. And many of them didn't come home. Many of them died, at the hands of their abusers. Many of them died from tuberculosis, which was kind of untreated in the schools. And so, oh gosh, when was it? It was earlier this year, I think, when they did some archaeological surveying outside of an Indian residential school in Kamloops, BC. All the Indian residential schools are closed now. They've all been closed, but only since 1994 the last one closed. So this is very recent. Anyway, they found the remains of 200 graves that were unmarked. Okay, so there's no headstone or cross or anything, and so nobody really knew that they were there. And so they used kind of ground penetrating radar, and they found all of these unmarked graves. So 200 kids from this school never came home and were simply buried in the backyard of this school, and nobody said anything, and everyone just went on with their lives. And what's kind of starting to happen now is that other indigenous groups are surveying the land outside of other Indian residential schools, which are also closed now, but they're finding graves outside of them as well. So this is going to be an ongoing process, but we're probably going to wind up with a tally of hundreds and hundreds of kids that died at these schools, and nobody said anything, nobody did anything, nobody was punished, everybody just kind of looked the other way. And so, you know, there's what happened to indigenous people in terms of, you know, the loss of their culture, the loss of their land, which we're sitting on right now, the way they've been kind of pushed aside in modern Canada. But now we also have to deal with, you know, the legacy of these schools, which we'll get into later as well. But what kind of pushed this into public view even more was reflect on what's happened, because it's very easy, you know, in Canada today, we've got a lot going on, right? There's, you know, we've got school, we've got work, we've got our relationships and our family. You know, there's a lot of stuff on Netflix and Amazon Prime. We're very busy, right? But, you know, tomorrow is about taking, not the whole day, but just taking a little time to think about the fact that, you know, something horrible has happened here. And it's not something that Canada really likes to advertise. We don't, you know, we haven't marketed ourselves as, you know, people who, you know, mistreat Indigenous people. We've marketed ourselves as, you know, open and multicultural and accepting and all that stuff, right? That's our brand, right? But there's kind of a darker chapter to this history as well that we have not, I think Canada has not fully acknowledged and definitely hasn't fixed, right? If you do something this awful to a group of people, you have to mend that relationship, right? You have to fix it somehow. And so far we haven't fixed it, and we're not even entirely sure how to fix it yet. But tomorrow is probably a step in the right direction so that we can, you know, at least think about it. It's causing people to talk about this issue, and, you know, it's one step forward towards, you know, sort of repairing the relationship between Indigenous Canadians and non-Indigenous Canadians. And again, that's just a, you know, that's 5 minutes or whatever. There's a lot more going on here, and when we get to it, we'll deal with it in the racism section. When we get to it, I'll give you a little more detail on kind of what the story has been in Canada for Indigenous people. As I say, it's not a it's not a heartwarming, uplifting story, but I'm kind of hoping that it eventually will have a happy ending. Not this year and not next year, but maybe, you know, eventually things will look different. But again, it's a long process, and tomorrow is just part of thinking about that and reflecting on that process of colonization and what it's meant for Indigenous people here in Canada. So that's what the day is about. That's what all these orange shirts and everything is about. That's what the Every Child Matters thing is about, because they're referring to those children who were buried at those schools, right? Sort of a take on Black Lives Matter, right? Every child matters, but still, that's what that is. Yeah, so that's what tomorrow's about, just so that you are aware of what's going on. Do you have any questions about that, or again, we will come back to it, but that's the deal. That's the deal. Okay. Let's continue from where we were yesterday. I'm just going to say hi to some people here, which I didn't do earlier. So Crazio's here. Good morning, Crazio. Jesse's here. Good morning, Jesse. Unadi's here. Hello, Unadi. Kayla's here. Good morning, Kayla. And Alicia's here. Good morning, Alicia. So yesterday we were talking about privilege, and I got you to read this article, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, Again, it's getting a little dated because nobody calls backpacks knapsacks anymore, but still. And I asked you a few questions, and I think we have a pretty good grasp on this. You told me, I think, a couple times that privilege had to do with having, certain abilities or permissions or being able to do things that not everyone can do, right? That's what a privilege is. And here, in kind of social justice context, it works the same, right? It's defined the same way, but it kind of shows up differently, right? And again, that's why I like Peggy McIntosh's article, because she lists all the ways in which she has privilege as a white woman, right? And so I said her article was written from the perspective of she's a feminist scholar, or she's doing women's studies, and so she's thinking about herself as a woman not having privilege, right? And she's been talking about male privilege. But then she stopped and she reflected and she said, I wonder in what ways I have privilege as a white person. And she started listing them out. And as it turns out, there's quite a few ways in which Peggy here had privilege as a white person. Right? Can we look at some of those? I just want to open that article really quickly and just look at it one more time. Where is it now? Just gonna open it. Can I see it? There it is. Right. So she has a big long list, right? And I think I asked, well, maybe I meant to ask you yesterday, but we ran out of time. Did you feel that any of those kind of jumped out at you and was like, oh, I've experienced that, or I never thought of that?
Privilege.
Yeah, that list of privilege points that Peggy had. Did any of those kind of jump out and make you feel like, oh yeah, I have that? Like, for instance, I can turn on Netflix and I can very easily find shows about people that look like me, right? I can very easily find shows about white people, right? But if you are of another ethnicity or race or religion, you might find it more difficult to find shows that are about you, right? And again, Netflix is international, so maybe not a perfect example, right? But if you're just looking at sort of Western, if you're just looking at sort of Canada and the US, you might find it more difficult to find stories about people like you, right? A lot of these have to do with, I was looking at this one here, number 4. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in a location, if you move to a new location, I can be pretty sure that my neighbors will be neutral or be pleasant to me, right? And the underlying theme in that one, and a lot of these, is that I don't have to worry about people judging me because of my race, right? So me, Mike, walking through the world, people may be nice to me, right? People may be jerks to me. People may ignore me, and everywhere in between, right? People will treat me all kinds of different ways. But I never really have to worry about, if somebody's a jerk to me, I never think, oh, I wonder if they're being a jerk because I'm white, right? Never have to think that, right? That never even occurs to me, and it's probably not a thing, right? But for people in minoritized groups, for people of color, that kind of thought is always in the background, right? It's like, is this racially motivated, right? Is somebody acting this way because I'm black, or because I'm brown, or because I'm Asian, right? And again, sometimes if somebody's being really direct, but oftentimes you don't know, right? And so for people who are not in the dominant group, for people who don't have privilege, it's always kind of in the back of your mind, right? Are they going to treat me as me? Are they going to react to me? Or are they going to react to the social group I belong to, right? My race, my ethnicity, my religion, right? And again, there's lots of these that fall into that kind of pattern, right? The idea that, you know, you don't have to worry about being judged by the social group you belong to. Right? And it works this way for women too, right? Women sometimes have to think about the fact that, oh, is somebody going to treat me differently because I'm a woman, right? But I never worry about that somebody's going to treat me a certain way because I'm a man, right? So minoritized group people sometimes worry about that fact. All right, you said, I think it was you yesterday that you said that it was either you or Edel, and you were saying that something about, like, when you have privilege, you don't know that you have it, or you don't. Was that?
I didn't say like that.
Yeah.
I said like that I didn't notice like maybe I was like privileged, but
Hmm.
I just didn't notice that.
Right.
That's what I said.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And that's true as well, right? Often when you have privilege, you don't realize that it's working for you, right? You don't realize that it's helping you, right? But again, when you don't have it, you know, right? Here's maybe I don't know if this is an example of privilege, but I'm going to say it anyway. This happened to me while I was in Russia. When I was a graduate student, I was in Russia for 6 summers. So I spent a lot of time in Russia. Really liked it, had a great time. The Russians were great, except Vladimir Putin. I don't have any love for Putin, but the Russian people are nice. And I got onto this little bus one day. So I was going into town. I got on this little kind of minivan bus, sat down, and sitting across from me, on the bench seat across from me, was this really attractive young woman. Okay? So I sat down, and I kind of looked at her across the way, and she gave me the full checkout. Okay, the full, like, scan. And for a minute, I was kind of like caught a little off guard, because like here in the West, women don't really check men out quite so obviously. They certainly do, right? Women check men out all the time, but not, you know, they do it when no one's looking, right? So you don't really notice. And so this woman checked me out very noticeably. And so I'm not bragging here, but I will admit part of me was like, yeah, all right. You know, I felt good about myself. But my next thought was, you know, oh my gosh, like, do I look okay, right? Like, I actually had hair at the time. So I was like, you know, is my hair fine? Like, are my clothes okay? Like, I didn't really, you know, I was just going into the lab today. I didn't really, you know, plan on making myself look nice. Do I look like a schmuck? Am I okay? You know, and suddenly I kind of got very self-conscious. So I had this like split second of like, oh, all right, I'm cool, you know. And then the second thing was like, oh God, do I look okay, right? And you know, nothing really sort of came of that, right? She got off the bus and it was fine. But I kind of thought about it after, and I was like, oh, like I wonder what it's like for women who get checked out quite obviously all the time, right? And you know, yeah, maybe there's that little, ooh, you know, people are checking me out, but the bigger feeling that I had from that interaction was kind of discomfort, right? Like I felt self-conscious, you know, I felt self-conscious because people were looking at me like that, right? And so, you know, I kind of wondered what it would be like if, you know, it just didn't happen to you, you know, once in forever. But what if it happened to you like, you know, once every 15 minutes or half an hour, right? What if it happened to you multiple times a day? What if it happened to you, you know, in a more obvious or direct way, right? And and what if, like in my case, this young woman, she's an attractive young woman, so I was like, all right, that feels good, right? Um, but like, what if it wasn't an attractive young woman? What if it was someone I didn't find attractive? Or what if it was a man, right? Or what if it was a big, scary-looking guy on an empty SkyTrain car, right? And so I kind of had, for a second, I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, I wonder, this is a privilege that I enjoy, right? That I can walk through the world and I don't have to worry about people staring at me. I don't have to worry about people checking me out. I don't have to worry about people making sexual comments as I walk by. I don't have to worry about being sexually assaulted for the most part, right? I don't have to worry about any of those things. But do women worry about those things? Do they have to be concerned about those things maybe every day, right? And that gave me a little window into privilege too. So sometimes privilege is things that you get to do, right? But sometimes it's also the ability to ignore it, right? To not deal with it because you don't have to, right? So maybe people get checked out all the time. Maybe, inappropriate sexual comments are made. Maybe sexual assaults happen. But as a man, part of my privilege is that I can just ignore that and go on with my life, right? Because it doesn't really, it's not directed at me, right? Women don't really have that option, right? They do need to be a little bit concerned about it, right? Not super concerned, but maybe super concerned, right? If you look at the statistics around sexual assault here in Canada. So again, privilege can be things that you get to do. It can be, your ability to sort of go certain places or do certain things, but it's also your ability not to pay attention to something, right? And again, that's something that I cannot pay attention to, right? As a white person in Canada, I cannot pay attention to Truth and Reconciliation Day tomorrow. I can just say, whatever, I'm going to do my own thing and not really think about it at all. But do Indigenous people have that ability? Not really, right? They're still dealing with the effects of colonization and racism and discrimination, and there's Indian residential schools, and now there's all these dead kids, and there's a lot of things to deal with, right? And as an Indigenous person, you kind of can't look away from that, or at least it's more difficult to look away. For a white person like me, yeah, I can ignore it if I choose, right? And that's part of privilege as well, is that you get to ignore the problem because it's not pointed at you. Does that make any sense? Did what I said about women, is that accurate as well? Because I'm doing a bit of imagining, right? Something happened to me and I'm saying, oh, I wonder if this is what it's like, even just a little bit. But am I right or am I wrong? You think I'm right? Yeah. Yeah, it was a weird feeling for a short period. Right? It was like, oh, that's an odd feeling. I asked you yesterday here, are people with privilege doing anything wrong? Because people in dominant groups are the ones that have privilege, right? And I'm a member of a lot of dominant groups, am I not? I'm a man, dominant group. I'm white, dominant group. I'm from a roughly Christian background. I'm not really religious, but I'm from a Christian background, which the majority of people in Canada are still. I'm kind of middle class, so I'm not part of the really rich people, so maybe I'm not in a dominant group there. I'm a Canadian citizen, which puts me in a dominant group here in Canada. I'm straight, I'm a heterosexual, so that puts me in a dominant group here in Canada. So I have a lot of privilege, do I not? I kind of do. Is that bad? Am I bad? Should I feel guilty? How should I feel about this?
Well, because
people don't have a choice. Like they were just born privileged. But if someone um uses their privilege to like abuse or look down on others, then I think it's wrong.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So two ideas there from Eunice. So the first one is that, yeah, I have a lot of privilege, but none of that is really my doing, right? I didn't do anything to be born who and where and when that I was, right? I had no hand in being white. I just am. I had no I had no hand in being male. I just am. I had no choice in being heterosexual. I just am. I had no choice in being born in Canada. I just was, right? All of these things kind of happened to me and no part of my, were no choice of mine, right? I didn't earn them. I didn't choose them. I just am them, right? So in some ways, yeah, I haven't really done anything wrong just being who I am. But Eunice mentioned another point is that it depends what I do, right? It depends how I use it. And how could I use my privilege how could I use my privilege in a good way? How can it be a good thing? Just what?
Ignore.
Ignore?
Yeah.
Ignore what?
So for example, in that illustration that you have told to us, ignore the things that like people says about, I don't know, sexual comment, anything like this.
Yeah.
So if you can like ignore it, you can like count it as a benefit.
Okay. But
Advantage.
yes, but well, it's an advantage for me for sure, right? Because there's a lot that I can't as a member of a.
Let's talk in general. I'm talking generally.
Generally?
Like if some women can like ignore this, so it is a good benefit.
Well, definitely, right? What do you think about that? Yeah, yeah.
Or maybe use the privilege that you have and like put it to good use. Like um if you have privileges, it means you can voice out your opinions to help the ones in the minority groups. So like the you have higher chances of being heard. Yeah.
True.
Put it to good use.
Yeah.
Help others.
People in dominant groups have a better chance of being heard, right? So I can use that to speak out for others who maybe they don't get the microphone very often, right? And so I can use the fact that, I can speak, I'm allowed to speak, I can use that to speak in favor of equality, right? In favor of people who are not getting the microphone very often, right? Arad, can you explain to me what you were saying just a minute ago, just in one more time, because I think I missed your point in there.
So you said, how can a privilege can be a benefit?
Yes.
So I said like privilege by the own definition, if we can like ignore some bad things, it could be an advantage for people.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes. And that's very true, right? And again, kind of the more privilege that you have, the more things that you can kind of safely ignore, right? And a really good example of this is actually the super rich, right? Because they don't have to concern themselves with pretty much anything, right? They've got enough money that they can just have everything taken care of, right? Their house is a mess, house cleaners, right? Car doesn't work, buy a new one, right? Somebody's suing you, just pay your lawyer and get them to take care of it, right? The more money you have, kind of the more things you get to ignore, because your money can either insulate you from them, or you can just have it taken care of by someone, right? You just
Anything good in this world can be a privilege. Anything that can like that can raise you a level up beside the like facts and from other people's like make you special. Anything that make you special from the others can count as a privilege.
Yeah, and actually that's what you're talking about is another. I guess it's kind of a further step of social justice, but I guess it's the bigger question of like how much equality do we actually want, right? Because we know that, you know,
If there is privilege, there is no equality.
if there's privilege, there's no equality.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, do we want perfect equality, or is that even possible?
I mean, normally people don't want equality. If they did, um, there was an equality before, but they don't want it
Yeah.
because we're humans.
Yeah.
We're just like lying to ourselves that yeah, we want equality, like everyone should be equal, but no, this is a big lie. Nobody wants to be equal like the others.
Well, in some cases, yes, right? Like if I'm gonna have a heart operation, and hopefully I never will, but if I ever have one, I don't want it to be like I don't want the position of heart surgeon to be open to just everybody, right? I want only the smartest, most talented, most steady-handed people operating on me, right? I don't want I don't want just anyone doing that, right? And some people are going to be better at that because of things that they were born with, right? They're smarter, they have better hand control, they're more focused, and so they can work hard for 12 years at medical school. That's the person I want, right? And so there's some places where, yeah, we have inequalities, right? Some people are going to be better at something like this, and some people are going to be not as good. And I want the person who's better. Right? I don't want equality in this case. I don't want just random people hired. I want people who are talented, and part of that talent is not chosen, right? You are born with you're born with a certain brain and certain motor neurons in your hands and things like that, right? Some people are going to have a talent for that, some people not so much, right? And I want the people who are talented. That's who I want doing it, right? And so, yeah, we're always going to have a little bit, but I mean, how much is acceptable, right? And on what basis?
I think like in some part inequality is good and in some part is bad. So imagine let's just like that it's everything and every single thing in this world for each person is equal. There would be no effort. There would be nothing. Like it's like the world became pointless.
Yeah, well, and I think fortunately, a situation of perfect equality is almost not possible, right? Because again, we're all
It's just a lie.
yeah, well, we're all unique, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at the reason why we have inequality in the first place, right? So, for instance,
That's true, but I'm just gonna give you a simple example.
okay,
Women have something that men doesn't, and men have something that women doesn't.
sure,
So we cannot actually get them to the right place as equal as it is. These two are not equal.
yeah.
See?
How do you achieve equality with things that are different, right? And you're right, men and women are different and in some ways complementary, right? But yeah, how do you attain inequality, or how do you attain? We can definitely attain inequality. How do you attain equality with things and people that are different, right? And that's the tricky question, right? Is what do you want, and how do you get it? Like, what kind of equality do you want? How much of it? And how do you make sure that you can have it?
Even some people who are, I'm not gonna say that even like it is a good thing, but some feminisms are just looking for they're not looking for equality. They're just looking for the better choice for themselves.
Right. And so, yeah, it's
So in some cases there is no equality in this world. In
yeah.
some cases there are.
It
They're
depends.
right, but in some cases they're not.
Yeah, well, it definitely depends on who you talk to, right? And if I can tie it back to critical thinking, what what their argument is, right? Like what kind of argument are they making, and is it a valid one? And some people aren't making good arguments, right? They're talking about equality, but their arguments are kind of flawed, right? And yeah, no, agreed, agreed. Um, okay, here's what I want to do. So here's what privilege is, right? Is that privilege is something that operates on a societal level, right? So it's usually, we could see it happening between individual people, but it's really in terms of, it's based on how society operates, okay? And again, it gives advantages or favors or benefits to members of the dominant group rather than the minoritized group. And so I want to give you some quick examples of how we see privilege showing up in the world, and we'll see it because I have a really short story for you to read, okay? Again, it's very short, it's like a page and a half, but it does a good job of illustrating some elements of privilege, okay? So, 3 things externally, okay, or structurally. So, number 1, everyone's looking down. Are you guys with me? Is everyone with me? Okay. 3 things that are kind of external expressions of privilege. So, number 1, the dominant group norms are built in to the structures of society. Okay? Dominant group norms are built into the structures of society. And can I give you a quick example of that? Maybe I can. So, for instance, you all came here this morning, right? You got up, you got dressed, you got out the door, you took the bus, you took the train, came up the stairs here, and sat down, and here you are, right? And part of the reason that you did that was because all of you are able-bodied, right? You can all see, you can all hear, you can all use your legs and your arms, right? They work normally. I shouldn't say normally, but I'll say normally, right? So you got up, and all of you and me, there were all kinds of obstacles in our way that for a person with a physical disability would struggle with, right? Some people with disabilities can't get themselves dressed in the morning, right? They need assistance, right? Some people, are in a wheelchair and can't use stairs, right? Some people, their hands don't really work very well and they can't open doors, right? Some people can't see or can't hear, right? And yet, so there's all these little barriers, right? The stairs, crossing the street, getting dressed, getting yourself on the right bus when you can't see, right? All of these things are little barriers that people with disabilities have to jump over. But you all and me, we didn't notice them at all, did we? You didn't think about any of that stuff on your way here. You thought about whatever you thought about, right? Your own life stuff. You didn't worry about those barriers because our society is built with people like us in mind, right? People who can see, people who can hear, people who can walk and use their hands. That's what our society is kind of built for. And again, we have accommodations for people who have different abilities, right? We have little ramps on the bus. We have, the bus tells you what bus it is, right? There's a little recording just in case you can't see. There's the little beep, when you press the button to cross the street, it chirps at you just in case you can't see. You can hear when the light goes. So yeah, we've made accommodations, but the world is not really built for people with disabilities. It's built for people like us, right? So the dominant group, able-bodied people, have built a world that works for them, right? Physically speaking. The construction of what's normal and not normal is done by the dominant group, right? So dominant groups get to choose what's normal, what's cool, what's in fashion. Dominant groups get to position themselves as the default thing, okay? And I don't have a really good example of that, but maybe I can come up with one a little bit later. And finally, invisibility of privilege for the dominant group, right? So usually the dominant group doesn't realize the privilege they have, or they just don't know what privilege is at all, totally invisible. There's some internal things happening too. And so sometimes people with privilege believe that their group has the right to their position, right? So men are mostly in charge, right? If you look at government and if you look at companies, men mostly have positions of power. And some men would say, well, yeah, of course, because, we are more logical, right? Or we're more decisive, or men are just natural born leaders, right? That's something that someone might say using their privilege, right? They might just assume that men are better leaders, and therefore that's why most leaders are men. The internalization of messages of your group's superiority. Sometimes people in the dominant group do actually think they're better than people in minoritized groups. The lack of humility that results from limited knowledge of the minoritized group. So sometimes people in the dominant group don't really understand much about minoritized groups, and they're not really embarrassed by that, right? They don't feel that they really need to, right? They're not really that interested. And again, number 4, invisibility of privilege, right? People with privilege often don't realize that they have it, or even if they do know what privilege is, sometimes they're not really sure when it's working, right? When they're being benefited by it. Okay, so take a quick break, come back, and then I have a very short story for you to read which will illustrate some of these things for us, okay? All right, take a break. Okay, people, we are officially back. So, privilege shows up kind of in the way that the world is structured and the way, we think of things as normal or not normal. But it's also in the way that people act and behave, right? So, to sort of illustrate this, I want you to read this short story. It's not handed out like the slide says. It is in Microsoft Teams. And I think in Microsoft Teams it's under readings and it's called External and Internal Privilege or something like that. Dunya, do you see it? Is that what it is?
No. Mark Privilege? Oh, no, the person, yeah.
Yeah, external and internal? Okay. So it says that. So I'd like you to read it and again, try to pay attention to ways in which we see external and internal dimensions of privilege, okay? And maybe for the last question, don't choose 3, just choose one that maybe you can connect to the real world in some way, okay? So don't do 3, just do 1. So I'll let you read it and then we'll talk about it, okay? Arad, we're just reading that little story that I talked about. It's in Microsoft Teams under Files and Readings, and it's called External and Internal Dimensions of Privilege. Yeah. Where can you find what? It is in Student Portal under Course Documents. What's that?
Oh.
When's the next one? Maybe we'll try for it next week sometime. All we've had is we just had the one argument assignment so far. I need you to do another one. So we'll make that up tomorrow.
Why is he asking for work to do?
Well,
He likes studying.
that's how you gain
He's gonna
marks.
do it like whatever, like if I feel
Oh,
It's true. It's true. It's not like, oh, I was thinking of not giving you any more assignments, but now that Arad wants one, you're getting one way or the other.
I think the slides 10 until class 10 until 16, the slides are not in student portal. I'm not too sure.
That's true, they're not there yet, but I will post them. What's what?
Pretty much sexism.
Mm. Yeah, so can you think of something like this happening, but with, but it being about racism or about sexism rather than about eyes, right? Because here in this story, it's about eyes. I'll help you with that one. Maybe just another couple minutes, if that's okay. Oof. Okay. Okay, one more minute, then we will talk. Weird story, Eunice?
Very.
Very weird.
It's scary.
Mm-hmm.
The only time I've seen people with third eyes and movies.
Mm-hmm. Not an attractive look from our perspective, eh? $30, then we'll talk about this. Edo, this was a little short story. It's in Microsoft Teams, called External and Internal Dimensions of Privilege. Okay, so this is a strange little story, clearly fictional, right? But it does show us how some of these external and internal aspects of privilege work. So with the external one, let's look at that first. So I'll just back up my slide here to this one. Now, how are the structures, like the physical world of this society that we read about, how is it created to kind of privilege three-eyed people and create kind of disadvantages for people with only two eyes?
Two-eyed people look like strange people to the three-eyed, and some point of view that they're not they're not us, they're different from us. They're like we're normal and they're abnormal. So
Yeah, that's kind of number two all over, right? The idea that the dominant group creates the idea of what's normal and not normal, and clearly having three eyes is seen as normal, and having only two eyes, weird, right? Freaky in this little world anyway. Yeah, so that's good. The construction of what's normal and not normal. What else? Other kind of physical things in this world that are made for three-eyed people but not two-eyed people. Sunglasses, yeah. So she goes into the sunglass store, picks up a trio, right? 3 lenses, 1, 2, 3, right? So there's this. What's that?
It was a school, whatever it is, like institution for two-eyed and three-eyed, dyslexia, something like that. The doctor was recommending.
Oh yeah, she encounters this doctor on the street, right? And so they've actually developed technology to implant a third eye, right? And then she's like, and she tells him, she's like, no, I don't want that. And what's his response? Well, don't you want to be normal, right? Don't you want to be normal? Don't you want us to fix you? Right? That's good. What else?
The cane when watching the movie.
Right. She goes to the. I think it's a she, right?
Yeah, she.
Yeah. She goes to the theater to watch a play, and she only has 2 eyes, and so they give her a cane to find her way like a blind person, right? But do any of you need a cane with only 2 eyes? Of course not, right?
Can still see.
Yeah, so she didn't need it either, right? But of course, she was kind of given this thing, and now everyone will know that she only has 2 eyes because she's walking around with this cane, even though she doesn't need it anyway. What else? Other physical things? There's the program at the play, right? So she gets to her seat and she sits down and she's reading. I don't know if you've ever been to a play, but they have a little booklet they give you, and it talks about the production and who the actors are and what other things they've been in and stuff like that. And she's reading it, but what's happening?
It's designed for third eye.
Yeah, it's designed. Yeah, it's designed for people with 3 eyes, right? So the person in front of her is able to read it at the same time as her, right? And so she's trying to like figure out how this thing works, right? Because it's not really designed for people with 2 eyes. It's designed for 3 eyes. What else?
The bus tickets and then the chair.
In the where?
Well, it was bus station, I don't remember. I don't even know. The other eye or whatever it is. It was somewhere in the outside that like kids were just like hiding.
Oh, yeah. She went to like a restaurant or a diner. Yeah. So all the kids.
Also, the waitress was like just avoiding touches, her hand.
Right. I think that might be an internal one, but
Yeah, that is different.
but that's okay. That is true. Let's press pause on it for a second. But there is something else at the restaurant in terms of the physical structure.
The menu. You can. It's on the wall, like it's not on a book.
Yeah. And it's on the wall behind, right? So if you have a third eye, you can just look at the menu on the wall behind you, right? But of course, she has to turn around and look at it, right? So again, the restaurant is designed with three-eyed people in mind, as are the sunglasses, as are the implant technology, the program at the play, the cane she has to use. All of these are kind of physical ways in which the society kind of privileges three-eyed people. The last one that I'll throw in there that you might not have caught, and probably because maybe it fits into number one, is the idea that these two groups live separate from each other, right? She lives in a gated community, so the two-eyed people don't live next door to the three-eyed people. They live in their own area, right? So they are physically separated, right? And what do we know about, what does our character say, or what does she think when she sees other two-eyed people in this three-eyed person society? What does she say about them? Let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah, there it is.
They're usually in service positions,
Yeah.
working with their heads down.
Yeah, right? So all the people she sees that are like her all appear to be in kind of low-paying service jobs. They're kind of working with their heads down. They don't seem very happy or, excited. They're just kind of, again, keeping their heads down and just doing their job, right? So she kind of gets the feeling that they're not really welcomed in this society. What about the internal stuff? Let me just click over to that. The internal stuff. We see some of that. So, Arad, you were saying that the kids were certainly looking at her and crying, right? So,
Some other just hiding one of the elevators.
yeah. So people were expressing all kinds of behavior that that they were. What's that? Yeah, and kind of acting in a superior way, right? They're like, ugh, it's a two-eyed person, ugh, right?
Those teens on the sunglasses store.
Say again?
Those teenagers.
Oh yeah, the teenagers. What did they say?
Actually, you should hear how
Yeah. So one of them takes a picture of her, which again is,
Without consent.
without consent, right? That's pretty rude. But then she's like, "Oh my God, this is gonna be my Halloween costume," right? Can you imagine someone coming up to you on the street and taking your picture and say, "Oh my gosh, you're my Halloween costume"?
I
Pr-
could have had it.
It's pretty hard not to be offended about that, right? What else is said or behavior?
Can you imagine being born like that?
Right. They're like, "Can you imagine being born like that?" Right? So
the saleswoman to take class and this is not the appropriate one.
right. So the saleswoman steers her away from those three-eyed glasses, right? But then she kind of like looks down on her. She's like, "Oh, she pats her arm and says, 'Oh, you silly thing, right? You don't know which glasses are for you. These are for you here,' right?" Our character is not an idiot, right? She understands how to shop for glasses, right? But the salesperson is like, "Oh, no, dear, you belong over here," right? So she's kind of treated as less, right? Like kind of mentally less, but also she's steered away from something that belongs to the dominant culture, right? And again, you're allowed to wear whatever sunglasses you want, right? You can go into the store, pick whatever you want off the rack and wear it, right? People shouldn't be steering you, "Oh no, those aren't for you," right? But that's what happens here. What other stuff happens?
And I think it's a stereotype that for three-eyed people, they
Yeah.
think that two-eyed people are always angry.
Mhm. Yeah, I wonder why, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the teenage girls says, "Ugh, why are two-eyed people always so angry? Why do you think she's angry?" she's been looked down upon all day, and how are these girls acting towards her? Yeah, they're pretty rude, right? And so they're like, oh, why are two-eyed people always so angry? Like, I don't know. Why are you always so rude to two-eyed people, right? It's not them, right? You're behaving in a certain way. And so, yeah, we see kind of both of these things, right? The idea that, there's a lot of superiority going on here, right? That the three-eyed people are just better than the two-eyed people. And yeah, people don't really have any kind of understanding of the two-eyed person, right? That the two-eyed person is just like them, but with two eyes, right? But they somehow think they're quite a bit different, right? Anything else in terms of internal?
The waitress.
What's that?
The waitress.
Oh yeah, what does she do?
The one who didn't want to touch her hand.
Right. So this woman pays for her meal. The waitress comes back with the change. She puts out her hand, and the waitress purposely puts it on the table, right? As in, I don't want to touch you, right? Doesn't feel good. None of that feels good, right? Anything else that we missed? I think we've got it all, but is there anything we missed?
I think it's
Oh.
pretty much it.
Oh no, we did miss something. The play.
Oh, the story?
Yeah. What's the story about?
The three-eyed, the talented young man in the movie.
Yeah. So this play is about this young man,
He plays a two-eyed guy.
right? So it's this three-eyed actor who is playing a guy with two eyes. And what else? What's the story about? Yes, tragically lost his third eye. And now, is life even worth living with two eyes? Right? How do you all find the will to go on with your lives day after day with only two eyes? You're all so inspiring. And of course, you laugh and roll your eyes at me, right? But this is exactly what's happening, right? Is that these people see life as a two-eyed person as barely worth living, right? And so this young man who loses his eye now is, tragic, and right, and he has to somehow find the will to carry on, right? And how does our friend feel? How does our main character feel seeing that play? She probably feels just like what you're all thinking. See what?
Wonderful, and he feels very self-conscious about what the three-eyed people, or the majority of the audience might be thinking about you.
Yeah, right. So she's kind of hunkering down in her seat a little bit, right? And she's probably asking, the question she's probably asking is the same one that you popped into your head, is like, well, what are you talking about? Like, of course, there's nothing wrong with a life with two eyes, right? It's great, right? Life with two eyes is fantastic. But she's kind of being exposed to this idea that, no, this is, tragic, and how could you want to go on with just two eyes, right? So these people are not only, the two-eyed people are not only kind of discriminated against, but their lives are seen as less, right? Because why would you want to live as a two-eyed person, right? Why would you want to live with this horrible affliction, right? And of course, our main character is like, what are you talking about, right? My life is great. Did we miss anything else? I think we've got it all now, but so do you see how some of those things are happening in this story? So some ways in which the world is kind of physically created for the dominant group. What's normal and what's not normal is is sort of decided by the dominant group, right? Notice in the sunglass store that all of the cool, stylish sunglasses, they're all for people with 3 eyes, right? There's no cool, stylish sunglasses for people with or with 2 eyes. They're all kind of clunky blue blocker type things, which nobody likes, right? So we see that, and we also see a lot of people acting as if they are superior, right? You know, can you imagine being born like that, right? Don't you want to be fixed? And here in the play, how could you want to, and that's the message, right? How could you want to go on with your life with only 2 eyes, right? And again, this is just, you know, and this just happens in one day, right? So imagine trying to be a 2-eyed person living in this society day after day, being bombarded with these messages that your life is not worth it, that you're less, people look down on you, people wonder why you're so angry, people are talking down to you all the time and acting as if you're an idiot. Yeah, that wears down on you after a while, right? Maybe the last question I'll ask you is this. Can you, where's my questions? Can you think of a similar situation in the real world where this has happened or might happen? Not with eyes, but with something else?
People who like maybe lost limb or look completely different to people in that area.
Yeah, there's a pretty direct correlation or comparison with people who have disabilities, right? So people who maybe had an accident and now they use a wheelchair, right? Or maybe they lost a limb.
Feel the stairs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're doing a Terry Fox run later today, and our friend Terry Fox did just that, right? He lost one of his legs to cancer and then chose to run across Canada to raise money for cancer research, right? And so he's a little bit of a different story, but yeah, we often look at people with disabilities and think, oh gosh, how horrible, how can they, how can they find the will to go on, right? But in many cases, when you ask people with disabilities, that's not how they feel, right? They often feel that their life is great, they have, a few extra challenges to overcome, but, they wouldn't give up their lives for anything, right? Just like none of us would. And so, yeah, there's a really direct parallel with people with disabilities in this story, absolutely. Can you think of any others? Any other ways in which some part of this story might play out in real life? What's that?
Because sometimes if someone like the way they dress is like so colorful or it's very strange and not considered normal, like they will definitely earn stares from other people.
Right. Right. So people who, really anyone who is kind of outside of what's normal will, get extra attention. Yeah, extra attention or stares or comments. That's true. One of the things that occurred to me is, what about like recent immigrants to Canada who might not speak English very well? Like, I feel like some of the people in this story were treating our character as if they were not intelligent, right? Like in the theater, she was given a cane even though she didn't need one, right? And she was trying to figure out the program because it wasn't really designed for her. And then someone beside her very slowly and loudly said, "Do you need help?" Right? And our character speaks English. Our character is not stupid. She's like, "No, I don't need help. It's just that it's not designed for me, right? It doesn't work for me." But again, I wonder if sometimes we have, recent immigrants from Canada who might not speak English very well, and people assume that they are, or treat them as if they're somehow not intelligent, right? In which case, well, not in which case, but even though that's not true, people tend to behave that way sometimes, right? So I feel like that might be a real world connection. What about fixing? Do we want to fix people?
Fix?
Yeah, you know the doctor? He said, yeah, I can fix you. Don't you want to be normal?
Oh, that's true.
How do we, in what ways might we try to fix people in real life? The disability thing for sure, right? Like we do a lot of research to try to, help people overcome those disabilities, right? There's some really cool robotic hands that are being created. Have you seen these things? Amazing. I don't know how they work, but incredible. How else do we try to fix people? What's that?
I'm not too sure.
Not too sure. Has anyone heard of conversion therapy? Maybe it's not. Conversion therapy is something that we are moving towards making illegal here in Canada and the United States. Conversion therapy is the idea that, and it's mostly sort of Christian religious groups that practice it. If someone is gay,
Oh.
that means, yeah, so there's something wrong, and so you send them to a camp to kind of deprogram them of
I
their
heard that.
gayness, yes.
So you go back to being straight, right?
Well, that's the plan. It doesn't work.
People think that when a person is gay, it's like illness.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yeah, so conversion therapy is about, yeah, the idea that someone being gay is that's an illness, or there's something wrong with them, so they send them to this camp clinic type thing, and they cure them of their gayness, or they make them straight, which you don't. You can't. Fortunately or unfortunately or whatever, you can't change someone's sexual orientation.
They can do what they want.
Well, yeah, they can do what they want, but I also think that they can't, because I don't think you get to choose who you are attracted to. Right? Like, I'm attracted to women, right? I'm a heterosexual man or male, but I couldn't choose to be gay. Like, you couldn't give me enough money to do that. Like, I can't,
Yeah,
that's
same.
not a choice I can make, right? Like, I can't make myself attracted to people that I'm not attracted to. Like, you just can't do it, right? You can date them if you want, you can marry them if you want, but you can't kind of make yourself feel that, right? That's just the way that your brain is wired, right? But these people who run conversion therapy, they think they can cure people like this, right? And unfortunately, I'm sorry if I offend anyone here, but I think that's misguided. You can't do it.
I think that
Yeah, people kind of are what they are.
it's just wrong if you like force someone.
Well, that's kind of why we're in the process of making it illegal, because it's not, because it doesn't work, and it's destructive, right? Like, it's destructive to the person to, to say that they have an illness and then to try to cure them in this way. It doesn't work, and again, people don't choose who they are attracted to, right? Okay, that's enough for today. So tomorrow, have a nice day off, relax, sleep in, spare a few minutes thought for Canada's Indigenous people if you can, just because that's what the day is supposed to be for. But I'll see you back here on Friday. We're going to take 5 minutes and finish with privilege, and then we'll actually talk about something that's connected to this. We'll talk about ableism. So we'll talk about people with disabilities and how that kind of plays out in society. Okay, so we'll get into some good stuff. I have a little documentary to show you, which is kind of cool. But until then, thank you for coming today, and I'll see you Friday. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.